This episode is about preparation and the idea that if we are exploring new ways to play or adjusting the way that we play, preparation is one thing that can really benefit from adjustment. This episode has a guest. He goes by the nickname Crispy. You can find him on YouTube by searching for @Tablerunner. So he's recently discovered a desire for playing more and more in character, moving toward play in character, as we frame it around here, while leaving room for immersion. So I thought this was a good place for this conversation to happen. Who is Crispy? Well, you can read about him in the show notes, but in his own words, he's an RPG enthusiast who's been playing for a long time, who suddenly came to realize that he could be getting more out of his play. All right. Now, I got a lot of call-ins since the last episode, and I really want to share them now and here, because many of them have points that intersect with the points that are raised in this discussion. But as this conversation is an hour and 4 minutes in its own right, I don't think that does the calls justice. So I'm going to put those into a subsequent episode focusing on imagination, which means that there's still time to call in with your description of your own experience of imagination. What is, or what information, or what details, or what is the experience like for you when you're imagining something, particularly when you're imagining something from play? You can reach me at the usual places, which will be listed at the end, and you can find them in the show notes. Anyway, let's get into the episode with @Tablerunner Crispy. This episode is also available on YouTube. We have another guest. We're breaking all the records. It's not just one talking head, it's two.
It's two.
So,
it's two. Heaven help us.
It's two.
Yeah.
So those who have watched this channel before, they know me, but they don't know my guests. So, Chris, could you tell us a little bit about yourself? I'm not asking for your origin story. We can put that in the link below. But who are you?
I'll dump a backstory on you before you know it, Anthony. If you're hitting the eject button as quick as you can. So my name is Chris. I go by Crispy. It's a nickname of mine. I have a YouTube channel I started earlier this year, and it has been going for maybe 7 months. And I was prompted to start recording my thoughts on my efforts to change how I'm running games and how I experience the hobby, because I came to I had a bit of an epiphany that I wasn't getting as much out of the hobby as I could get. I was getting glimpses of it, but I want more than just a glimpse. I want something that's repeatable, and I'm looking for that in my own experience. And then I want to share that with my players. I run an in-person game, a weekly in-person game. And I have been very fortunate to have players that are willing to let me experiment on them as I go through this. Hey, I want to be in character all the time when we're playing. Of course, we're not, we wouldn't go so far as to be method actors. Okay. So I don't get the texts from someone in character. No. But when we're there at the table, we want to be completely immersed. We want to role play as we would describe role play as being. So, and the definition I'm using now, which is not the same as what I was using a year ago. A year ago, I would just be in perhaps the standard definition. As long as I'm tracking arrows on a character sheet, I'm role playing. Right. And now I'm much more in the camp of role play means that you're treating that character as if they exist, if they're real in a world, and if that imagined fantasy world or sci-fi world or whatever the setting is, we're pretending that that's real too. And then we get that real, it just has a totally different immersion level. And so my players, as I've experimented with doing different things, and I try to share my thoughts on what I've tried and what's worked and what hasn't worked, and what we're still working on, my feedback from the players has all been overwhelmingly positive. They thought this is just amazing. Like we have not we thought we were just scratching the surface before of what we could experience with these games that we can't get from any other medium. We can't get that from video games. We can't get it from board games. We can't get it from tactical type games. We get something different when we're actually role playing. So that's been it's been hugely rewarding, and I'm very encouraged that there's perhaps more out there like me that just didn't realize, look, you've been in this for over 20 years and you've just barely scratched the surface. You're just at the veneer level of what role playing could be for you if you're willing to kind of push that into a different definition of just, an adventure game or something like that, which are fun. And don't get me wrong, it had me hooked for 20 years, but now I'm looking at it and saying, no, I need something more than that. So,
or different, yeah.
That's me. Or different, yeah, something different.
Yeah, I mean, there is a certain amount of luck, right? When we're introduced to the games,
mm-hmm.
maybe less so now, but when we were young, when we were introduced to the games, the people that were playing them with you were also being introduced to the game, so nobody knew anything. So there's a certain amount of luck that your preferences would align.
Yes,
you might find yourself constantly changing groups or using up groups because you can't find that it's just not fun or whatever. People quitting because they were mismatched with preferences. So with this change that you have asked your group to explore with you, would then come what our topic is for today, which is preparation, a change in preparation in order to produce or help support a new experience at the table. So I watched a video of yours from a few months ago talking about, biting that particular bullet. And so I thought we could start with, what was your typical preparation for a non-special, a typical session?
Sure.
What did that used to be like?
So, and this, I imagine that others will share my background. What I used to do for preparation is I would think in terms of hook, line, sinker. So the hook is the obstacle, the initial obstacle that I would have in mind for that particular adventure. Usually it's contextualized with what had happened before. So if we were running multiple, instead of a one shot, if we were doing multiple sessions, I would say, well, so from thinking about what happened last time, what could be a next hook that would draw the players in. Then that hook would be followed by a line, and I would write maybe a paragraph or something for myself of saying, well, here's as they interact with this obstacle, here's the first things that the first secrets they can discover, or here's what's going on. And then of course the sinker is the twist at the end. And so I would have that, my preparation would be spent a fair amount just scripting out that, not so much as script as in they do this, then this, then this, but more, here's the event, here's the surface level explanation of it, but here's the twist on the end. Then I would spend a lot of time thinking about locations. Like I would try to have 3 or 4 interesting locations, and then I may draw them out, or I would spend a lot of time thinking, because the theater of the mind switch, which is what we do now, that beforehand I wasn't that. I was very much a miniatures on the table in a grid, or we eventually departed from the grid as I've been moving gradually over the years towards more theater of the mind. But then we had measuring sticks and that kind of thing. And so I'd be thinking about that. I'd be spending a lot of time thinking about the assets that I would need for the game. So whether that's images that I could find, or maps that I could pirate off someone or draw myself if I wanted something really terrible and in crayon. And I would do all of that. And then I would, of course, go through the process of thinking about the villains, those that would be in opposition to the party. There I would go through either publish materials, or I would try to create my own with varying degrees of success and failure, and come up with a number of potential foes that they could run into. And it would, for a 2 hour, well, let's call it a 3 hour weekly game, I was spending probably around 8 to 10 hours a week just getting all of that ready.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I've got some questions. The locations and the villains.
Yes.
As you prepared them, what were the criteria that informed those choices? Like, for example, did a location become interesting because it allowed the characters to make use of specific abilities that they had, or was it interesting because it looked cool, or it had unusual terrain features? I mean, like, was it connected or reactive to who the players are?
To the players themselves? Yeah, I tried to. I would say to various degrees of success. I think I would be giving myself too much credit if I said, yes, I looked at what the players could do, and then I thought of interesting parts of the environment that they could interact with. I think more often than not, I was thinking, well, okay, so this is a underground cavern, but what would make it odd? Okay, well, there's this feature over here, and I'll spend a little bit of time thinking about what that is, and then maybe I'll draw it out, the crayons I mentioned earlier, and I would get that kind of ready so that I was okay. So it's not just I didn't want just four walls, a ceiling, and a floor, but something that's a little more.
Sure.
There's something they can interact with. Where I didn't spend a lot of time, which I regret. Is I didn't spend a lot of time thinking about the other people that populate the world. I'd be thinking in terms of the enemies and the locations, but what I neglected in the past is I neglected the NPCs and the other characters. I mean, maybe NPC isn't even the right term for it. It's more of the world is populated with others than just the heroes and the goblins they're supposed to kill this week. So it should be more dynamic than that, I think. Now that I've but that's, you had asked what I was doing before. So that was what it would be. My wife used to, well, she still accuses me of this sometimes, is that I would spend essentially like a part-time job getting ready for a 3 hour game. And she's like, why are you doing this? Seems silly. And at one point I was trying to use a TV that we had down. So I was doing digital mapping, and then the digital mapping that evolved into, well, we're going to have, little characters, digital characters that I could move around that have their own sight, line of sight and vision characteristics. And so then I'm spending hours and hours working with occluders and light sources and all of these things. So she, which is really good of her to do, she just said, look, you are spending enough time that you could, this would be university credits if you looked at how many hours you're spending on this. And but that's what I was doing, and I did that for like I said, a weekly game for about 17 years. Is what I was doing. So quite a bit. And we changed up. You had mentioned earlier that sometimes people they get lucky and they are not lucky based on the preference of their group. And what would happen with me is that I would eventually just feel like, okay, I'm bumping up against the system, maybe I just need to change the game. So we would change the system, like, okay, well,
but play the same
fifth
way.
edition's not doing it anymore, so we're going to change it up, and we'll try DCC now, and now that's not doing it anymore, so we're going to change that up, and so. But I think that the secret sauce that I was missing wasn't the system itself. It was the way. It was more the style that I was.
The procedures of play and the end goal, the intention for play.
The intention, yeah. I think intention is the. Actually, I really like that. I'm going to write that down. It was the intention that I have my clipboard, of course. so yes,
that's awesome.
I'm going to write that one down. I like that one, Anthony. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of hobbies inside the hobby. You've got the miniature painter people and the map, the careful map designers. It's a hobby all by itself. They all feed in, and it's this great cycle of creativity. But the one thing it does is stack up the amount of time.
It does. Yeah.
So being completely devoid of artistic ability myself, I'm free of those burdens.
That's actually a good thing, I think, Anthony.
But okay, so the NPC thing, I mean, I understand. If we're thinking about being able to embody characters in play,
Mm-hmm.
then it seems like reductive to talk about player characters and non-player characters. But at the same time, that terminology has been around for almost 50 years. It's
Yes,
entrenched,
it
and
is.
it's one of our few pieces of entrenched and totally understood, not
Mm-hmm.
misrepresented terms.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So if I say NPC or GMPC or PC,
Everyone knows
everybody
what you're
gets
talking
it.
about.
But if I
Yeah,
say character, it could cover
could
a
be
whole
a whole
multitude
bunch.
of things. So
Yeah.
I can't get upset about that one. But all right. So what I'm hearing is you're spending much more time in preparation than in play
Oh,
in this original version.
yeah, and the original version probably three times as much preparation than actual play. Mm-hmm.
And over time, this had decreasing satisfaction for you.
Yes. Now there are some. I understand there's some out there where world building is
Their
their
joy.
that's their jam. That's the joy they
Yeah.
get out of the hobby is creating the all the intricacies, the political intrigues, and the fact that nature works slightly different or physics works like slightly different, or designing their own magic systems. And while I can respect that creativity, that's not. I get more of the enjoyment of the hobby from the actual play, seeing the having the interactions with players and having that
Right.
like seeing them gel together and come up with innovative
Yeah.
solutions and really get into their characters and even get to the point where they feel like they've got a connection with this character. They're no longer thinking of what would this character do. They just are instinctively know what the character would do. That's how they are. So
Yeah.
I'm not a world builder. Some out there I'm sure are, and if
Yeah.
that's the case, then that's fine. That's just not what I was. That's not
Right.
what I looked forward to. I was like, oh goody, I get 9 hours of prep time for my 3 hour game.
Right.
It's not what I was. Not keeping me up at night with excitement.
Right. Yeah. You're not living their lives. You're living your lives,
That's
and you're
right.
discovering your own preferences. So we can see some hints, right?
Mhm.
Why is there all this preparation if the enjoyment comes from play? Theoretically, you'd
Exactly.
want to use all that time for play. So there has to be some sort of connection between all of that prep and then creating the world that
Yes.
people want to interact with.
Mhm.
Um, so I think that's an interesting sign. But you also mentioned immersion, right? So
Yes.
we have role playing, we have, in a sense, portraying a character, which doesn't need to mean embodying the character, and certainly doesn't
No.
have to lead to an immersive experience in the perspective of that character.
Mhm.
It could lead to an immersive experience of portraying the character, but that's a whole different
Right.
kettle of fish, right?
Right.
So you want to have a play experience that allows people the time and the freedom and the relaxation to be able to bring about that attentive state where
Mhm.
immersion can happen. Or are we talking about just immersion being I'm playing my character? Like, which usage of that hot topic term are
Yeah,
you
that
thinking
is a
about?
hot topic term. What I what I envision when I say immersion, my target isn't. I guess how would I describe that?
It's not easy, so don't
It's
worry.
not an easy one, no. And I appreciate the question because it does make me think. Well, what is it when I mean when I encourage my players to be in character, to be what does that actually mean? Um, what I want, what I'm looking for when it's immersion is I'm looking for an authentic portrayal of that character's personality and weaknesses and strengths that are like, for example, if I have an 18-year-old in the group for probably for a limited period of time. He's probably, I don't know, a third of the next youngest player. Like he's quite a bit younger than the rest of us. He chose to play a 72-year-old Italian hitman. Okay.
Okay.
So what I want from him for immersion is I want him to play the guy as if he has arthritis in his left knee, and he's not like, I'm not looking for an 18-year-old with a 70-year-old skin suit. Like, I want him to really be authentic with that.
Right.
I want the players to authentically portray, and that's not that I'm not looking for, I'm not an accent guy. What I'm talking about is I want their interactions, their in-world interactions, to be believable to
Right.
themselves and to everyone else. And
It's
when
easy
that
for everyone
happens,
else at the table to
yeah.
imagine
And so
that
they're
those,
picturing
yeah,
him, like, so this player who's, I mean, I'm not kidding. Like, we're all 3 times older than this kid. Like, he's a lot younger than us. But I want, in when we're in that motion, that moment, for that brief period of time, we're seeing him as he's describing himself in the world as a 72-year-old man. That's, his best days are long past, but he's still got some skills that are needed in this particular obstacle,
right,
and then play it like that. So, like, that's, and then to a point where we can all believe him when he says that he's this 70-year-old man, and this other guy's, one of the older players is playing a young guy, and they can do that in an authentic way that really does feel like that is a real 70-year-old man that he's playing, and not just, like I said before, just I mean, he's an 18-year-old and he's just got gray hair. Like, and he does the things that an 18-year-old would do rather than the things a 70-year-old would do. So,
right.
yeah,
Because he's not really considering the
not
perspective
considering all
of the
the other
character.
things, like,
Yeah.
yeah, and in context of the setting. And so for me, it's really, is are you interacting, are the players able to interact in the world such that the world feels like it's becoming a higher resolution of itself, so it's being fleshed out by them. You mentioned this in a recent video, and I think I completely agree that, look, if you had mentioned the bakery thing across the street, and I completely agree with that, Anthony. I think that that's the kind of resolution that I want players to bring now. Whereas before, I was trying to envision everything that could
For
possibly
them.
be in the environment, which is limited by my own weaknesses of imagination. Whereas if I can engage those players so that they're imagining things, there's things I try to do now to make the ground a little more fertile for that imagination. So we're playing in a 1975 New York City. So I have the hits of 1975 playing in the background. Like, so
Okay.
I have the sounds that I'm trying to, I'll have a few assets prepared, images, this is what the 1970s cars look like. Everyone, here's the dress, 1970s dress. Here's New York City, Times Square in 1970. This is what it looks like. And
Terrifying.
those kind of things, just trying to help seed the ground, as it were, so that then
Yeah.
they realize, no, there's a payphone in every corner. Like, that's just what we have, right? That's they're not thinking cell phones anymore. It's a big hard, our lives are governed by either your, Android or iOS or
Yeah. Yeah.
whatever it is. But taking a step away from that, what is it like? What would we do differently then? Because we don't have the modern conveniences. This is, that. So I try that. So when that's a long answer, Anthony, I apologize. You should have been warned in
No,
advance. But I think that
it's
the
not.
for me, that's immersion. So when I say
Okay.
immersion, I want that authenticity, that believable. Okay, it makes sense then that you would do that because of who you told us you are in this, or what your character is,
Sure.
and in the setting as well. It all makes sense. It's harmonious, and it can be interacted with others and still remain believable within the context of the game setting.
Gotcha. Okay. So I've come to a different usage of the term immersion. So for what you've described, I describe as in character play.
Okay.
And then if we can play that way in a way that's comfortable for everybody, then we may feel that our imagination, like those of us who are visual imaginers or whatever, but anyway, our imagination of the scene can become such a focus point that, like the flow state, you hear people talking about their game session like, I can't believe it's been 4 hours. Like, it feels like it's only
Yes.
been 5 minutes. That kind
Yeah.
of thing. That those
Yeah.
hints that you've been paying attention to the thing in the game that interests you. So for me, that's in character play. So I've been paying
Mhm.
attention to the character so intently that I've forgotten the passage of time or whatever. So that's
Mhm.
immersion for me. But to focus on in character play as you've described it, to then link back to our preparation, what can we do in order to make it easy for everybody to just play their characters, right?
Mhm.
So the 18-year-old can remember arthritis or shortness of
Yes,
breath,
exactly.
or did I
Yeah.
take my my
Yeah, that's
nitroglycerin
right. Which
pill?
pills have I taken? Yeah, exactly. My water pills and yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That's
And for everybody else to remember that that's true too.
mhm.
Like when you start to get references from the other players about the specific characteristics of the other characters as if they're really seeing it, right? Because they're imagining the old
Yes.
man, they're imagining the young man, they're imagining the
Yeah.
fashion plate in his flares and his
Yeah,
aviator
exactly.
glasses.
Exactly.
So these
Yeah,
details come out is
they do.
so how can we
Yeah.
get there?
Yeah,
So
that's a
if
great
you
question. Yeah.
yeah, if
Sorry, go
you
ahead.
are doing all the preparation, if you're doing 8 hours of preparation
Yeah,
and having to be the voice of all of those details, there's just not enough time.
there isn't.
Like you
Eh,
can't physically speak fast enough to populate that
No,
whole scene.
no, 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 you
So you
can't.
felt dissatisfaction and you decided to find a different way. So
Yeah.
what have you experimented with?
So here's what I've experimented with. I've gone so far as to say I'm going to walk into this with just a rough idea of what the obstacle will be, and that's it. Like so I've gone from 9 hours of prep time to maybe 5 minutes of prep time. And that was exceptionally uncomfortable and a bit of a train
Uh,
wreck. I got to be honest, Anthony. It was a bit of a train wreck because what I was doing then is I was still pretending as if I had that kind of thought process in place already, but I
and
didn't.
hoping it would come from somewhere.
Yeah, I was hoping it would just be reactive. I'll just react to this, react to that. But the problem I had with that is that while I could do that maybe with one player, maybe two players, I had five players. And reacting to everyone as they're trying to be in character, as you described. So in character play is definitely a focus of ours.
Hmm.
Not it hasn't been in the past, but this is a new development.
Right, right.
But once people get that taste of in character play, they can't go back.
I
They're
think so.
spoiled forever. They can't go
Yeah.
back to the way it was before. So my issue was that I didn't have enough forethought that I could react in believable ways to five different people that are running five very different characters and aren't just following one my like they I because I encourage my maybe take a step back. I'm encouraging my players now to come to the game prepared. And what I mean by that is I want them to be thinking about what their character wants, what their
Mm.
character's secrets are. I'm like, I don't want you to tell me the secret. I don't want that. I want that to be something that's going to drive you, um, and may come out in play and may not, and may change in play and may be something that you just throw away and discard and you have a new one for next week. But I want you to be thinking about that continually so that you're coming to the game ready. And then so I'm asking them to do that. And then I showed up with 5 minutes of, well, I think this is what there's going to be a robbery or something. And then there's nothing else. Like no, the lowest resolution thought that I
Right.
could possibly have. But I guess what I was doing, Anthony, was I was just stress testing it. So can I go from
Sure.
9 hours down to zero? And the answer is no, I can't. I had to have some I had to give some thought as to what the motivations of the those that are opposed to the heroes of the which are what the characters are. So what are their motivations? Why are they in opposition to the player characters? And what are their goals? And if left unopposed, what will they be going to next? And I had to give that some thought. So I've changed now. So where I spend most of my time not thinking about locations and how I would change a location, but more thinking about those in the world and the events of the world that are transpiring that may or may not have been influenced by what the characters did last week. So I'm thinking about that. What's going on? What could they've ignored some things, they focused on others. Those things that they ignore, those are just problems that multiply. And I don't want to leave those as just, oh, well, whatever happened with that? Oh yeah, right. Whatever happened? Well, whatever happened? Like, so I want to have
Yeah.
that be believable. So I'm spending a lot more time thinking about that. So I would spend maybe an hour or two just with a pad of paper, just thinking, okay, so what are the secrets that could be uncovered this week? And that's how I'm still retaining a little bit, white knuckle grip on the last vestiges of how I used to run games. But
Okay.
that's how I get that hook, line, sinker in there. What are the secrets out there that could be happening? What's really behind the scenes? Uh, and then spending the vast majority of my time thinking about the the other people in the world, the other characters in the world, whether they be NPCs or um, villains or what have you. They all have to have some motivations in there,
Right.
and what they're going to be using for. And I
Right. Because you had mentioned that earlier, that the sense that the
yeah.
world, like the way we talk about it around here, is that it was empty. There's
Yes,
the
yes,
there's the player
very much so.
characters, and there's the villains, and it just,
Mm-hmm.
when you
Who
think back
else?
on the session, you can't really remember anyone else
Yeah,
being around. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. Who shods the horses? Who does the who grows the turnips? Like who is the we don't have any of those people until we need them, and then all of a sudden there's just the storekeeper there, and it's not like there should be a.
Right.
I much prefer, especially since I like to run modern campaigns or near modern campaigns like 1970s. It makes sense to me that there'd be a full New York City with all of its noises and lights and sounds and smells, and it should all be there. So I
And
spend a
how do
lot
you
more
do
time
that
thinking about
without
that.
that being the whole focus?
Yeah, that's a tricky thing, and I think that when I think about it, I think of I try to make a distinction with NPC and PC between heroic and non-heroic. So the others are not, while they have their ambitions and they're going to be pursuing their aims, they're not, the spotlight shouldn't be on them. So they're going to be doing a lot of that off camera, off scene, like that's going to be happening off there. But it's a challenge. I don't know that I have an answer to that, because that's something that
Sure.
I'm still working on that. It's a great question, and one that I'm going to write down on my clipboard. I just want to think about how do you do that, because I don't know.
So, well, yeah, and it will change, right? Like you
Yeah,
mentioned, who shoes the horses.
yeah,
In the fantasy milieu, you're going to have a much lower density of people that they encounter, maybe, or a lower frequency. But
hmm
in 1970s New York, they could potentially be bumping into people all the
all the
time. It's
time.
like the red dress
Yeah.
scene in the Matrix. That
Yes,
tidal wave of people.
yes,
Do you really
yeah.
want to
And I've done
go
that.
there?
It's so funny that you mentioned the red dress in the Matrix, because I had the main, spokesperson for the commission, the commission that oversees the five families, the five major crime families of New York. And her name's Rosetta. And what is she? She's in a red dress. Like she's a lounge singer in a red dress. And that's exactly what I was thinking of, is that Matrix scene of the girl in the red dress. Where is she? Okay. That's her. Right. So yeah, I'm trying to do that without being bogged down in too much narration too, because I'm trying to keep that. I'm trying to share more of um, that narrative time with players. I want them to
Mm,
be able to narrate what they're doing, and in so doing, take more of the time. So it's not 90% of me talking, which is obviously a shortcoming of mine, but it shouldn't be so much. Shouldn't be so much of me. Uh, it maybe should be more of a sharing of, I don't know what the exact percentage would be, 50-50, 60-40. I don't know, but I think it feels more authentic when you get that, like you mentioned, that banter between players. Like it feels, especially when it's in character play and they're talking to one another and they're doing so in ways that are believable, and it's not just them trying to win the scenario, I'm playing bingo with their character sheets. Oh, I've got this or I've got that. They're just
right.
they're they're being more I don't know. It just, to me, it's more authentic. They're more serious about what, staying within
Yeah,
what their character's expertise would be rather than what their
yeah,
player expertise would be. And that will involve dice rolls, of course, and we still have that
yeah.
mechanic.
I
So
don't
yeah.
find that it's something I could put a percentage on. I don't find that it's consistent because it changes with the scene. So
Mhm.
uh, I've been sharing a Call of Cthulhu campaign that we've been
Yes, I
playing.
started watching it. Yeah. Yeah.
Hey, and there's one moment that's relevant to this because they're all in one character's apartment. They're in Alfred Small's apartment, and they're ostensibly talking about the weird stuff that's been going on.
Mhm.
I'm saying nothing for most of that entire session. I'm sitting there saying nothing except when they read a passage out of the book. Of course, I'm the
Mhm.
text in the book and stuff like
Mhm.
that. But it's 5 o'clock in the morning. It's 1931 in Boston, and they've woken up Alfred Smalls, and they're not talking about this scary event that happened. So they're doing other things.
Mhm.
They are raiding his hidden liquor cabinet because it's
Mhm.
prohibition. They are starting to
Mhm.
cook breakfast, and they're moving around this kitchen. This kitchen didn't exist a minute
Prior to them saying it. Yeah,
prior,
of course.
right?
Yeah.
But now these three characters are navigating the space, and all they're doing is talking to each other, and the conversation is about this weird stuff.
Mhm.
But their description includes how they're moving around the space and how
Mhm.
they're the eggs are starting to burn. So I'll take over that while you go and do something else. And
That's excellent. Yeah.
it so I'm not required to do any speaking for them to create the apartment.
Mhm.
I just have to remember what they
Yeah,
created.
that's a good point. Like, so you've got to remember what it is. Like, if they're going to do that, which is wonderful when they're doing it, in my opinion, it would be a waste if I forget that they had said this and I had corrected them. They said it, and why should I correct them? Of course, there's going to be
Right.
a kitchen there. Of course, they'll have
Of
eggs. It's
course.
1931. I mean, if they're not going to have eggs, they're not going to have, Captain Crunch. I mean, that would be a problem. But they're going to definitely have they're going to have eggs, and
Yeah.
absolutely a Prohibition era hidden liquor cabinet. That's going to be a thing. Of course, it will be. Yeah.
Yeah. So it all just kind of flows. But when we go outside and we're heading toward a different location, then I'm going
Mhm.
to have to explain more. And the
Of
world
course.
is starting to move around them because they've set some things in motion. So there's the reaction principle. They've called, right? We'd
Yes.
like the police to come here because we're worried because
Right.
something's going to happen, right?
Right.
So I'm responsible for bringing the police or some other circumstance in. So that's the world reacting, of course. But
Mhm.
there are two other elements: there's acting and interacting.
Mhm.
So, what are the people that they don't know about yet that are intrinsically linked to their situation? What are those people doing, and how do those things mesh up in time?
Mhm.
And what is the timeline for these reactions? They've called for the police. How long reasonably does it take for the
Right.
police to show up, and what kind of police will show up? And
Mhm.
then the interactions, they're going to be interacting with each other, but they're going to do things like buy roasted chestnuts
Mhm.
on the street. And so I haven't talked about many people on the street. I talked about some woman pushing a pram through the snow, and you
Mhm.
see everybody twitch because they want to help her, but they're also in a rush. So what do we do?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
and they buy these nuts, and we describe that there's urchins. It's the height of the depression.
Right.
So they're these basically homeless kids
Yeah.
staring in wonder at these heated nuts, and wow, we wish we could eat today. And
Right.
what does that do to our hero, right? As
Mhm.
he's buying the nuts, does he just see it as backdrop, or is it something for him to interact with?
Right.
And so these little moments kind of let me fill up the city, hoping that the player will then continue to imagine and propagate
Yeah.
little scenes like that, like
Yeah.
people freezing to death in alleyways or lined up at
Right.
at,
The
at
soup kitchen.
workshops
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
soup kitchens
Waiting on.
and
Yeah.
stuff like
Exactly.
that.
Yeah.
I can't I don't have enough time. I don't have enough words to fill the city for them, but I hope I can drop pebbles in their imagination to cause ripples to spread through and have them imagine around themselves. Maybe they'll share it in their own description and maybe they won't. And I can't concern myself. I don't really care if we all imagine the same thing exactly the same way.
No, no. That was a bit of a surprise for me, Anthony. The fact that the game still runs exceptionally well when we don't have exactly the same picture in our head. It still can work, like, because from coming from someone who used to have the grids and the measuring sticks and the line of sight things and all of that, taking a departure from that and going more towards theater of the mind, and then becoming comfortable with the fact that we may not picture the room exactly the same, but it can still work and be believable for everyone. And we talk about it afterwards and say, well, how did you think of this? Well, I pictured it this way. And what's interesting, and I count it as a big win, is when talking about the game afterwards, so many of us had the exact same picture. And I think it has to do with the details. Like I think that the details, like you mentioned, those small, seemingly small, but not insignificant descriptions that contextualize the world, like the chestnuts, the cold, the snow, the men, blowing into their hands and stomping their feet, trying to stay warm as they line up for maybe there'll be some work for them today. Those details, I think, are really important because they and it doesn't have to be a lot, but just a little bit, because then the players start thinking about, when did I see something like, I saw a documentary on the Great Depression once, and I remember reading this, or I read this book, or and then they, just that small invitation. I think that's someplace that I need to work more on my own, making a note for myself, that those small, like the small details, I'm just going to call it the chestnuts, the roasted chestnuts are really important in that they provide a catalyst, perhaps, for serious players to say, okay, I can take that small detail and I can interact with it in a different way, or I can remember that, and then that'll inform my next decision, or perhaps not the next decision, but the decision 5 decisions from now, where I'm thinking back to that. Yeah, there's people in 1931 Boston who haven't eaten for 2 days. Like that's definitely going to have an impact, or it ought to have an impact, if the world's going to be believable.
Exactly. And how will that inform my choices, and how will it help me understand other people's choices, and who are the villains anyway?
Exactly. And are they everyone thinks they're villains, or is that the case, or is it something else? Is it that's why I think I haven't done a lot in horror, so I admire those that do. I haven't played any Cthulhu games, but I do think that that adds this very interesting, I guess, sinker is what I would call it. Like, so yeah, on the surface, it's a rapacious factory owner, or it's someone, whoever it is, but maybe there's something a little more to it that's even more sinister than what people think. And that'd be interesting. So I admire that. I haven't done a lot of that. I should, but I haven't.
Well, we all have our draws, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
My particular hill was trying to get in a position where I could run pulp heroic games. The books that I love to read, I found in games I could never run. And and
could I ask you a question about that, Anthony?
Sure.
If you don't mind, when you think of preparation and what you do to prepare, do you spend a lot of time thinking about favorite books that you've read, and how do you incorporate that information if that's what you end up doing?
I do and I don't, because I find that in games there's this one huge dividing line of preference between gamers, and that's those of us who picture role-playing games as a storytelling activity. And there's a big spectrum of the methodology of telling the story, right? Whether it's the game master putting you in a situation and railroading you along at one extreme, or all of us choosing to follow specific tropes in a specific way at a specific time, following emotional beats. That's another version of following the story.
Yeah.
But the other side of the divide is role-playing games as an experience.
Okay.
So in that case, if we go into the dungeon and it turns out to be a total party kill, nothing has been lost. Those characters,
Mm-hmm.
were for us to enjoy as an experience, and we played them through to the end of their lives. There was no sense that we were part of an epic fantasy story that was going to end somewhere, right? So, my side of that preference is I'm on the experience side.
Oh, me too. Absolutely. Yeah. As you just absolutely.
When I think about books, I don't think about trying to follow the plot or provide the beats. I want to provide authentic to that genre, the type of characters that they should meet in the type of environments. And so my preparation, which I think of as preparation for improvisation.
Yes.
I want to be able to, in the back of my mind at all times, be ready to conceive of an action for the characters that I'm responsible for, a plausible reaction for the characters I'm responsible for, and believable interactions for the characters I'm responsible for, without thinking what would be a good decision for the story.
Right.
I want to be entertained and surprised looking back at our play saying,
oh,
that was a pretty cool story.
Yeah, me too. Look at what happened. I never thought that would happen. Yeah, exactly.
That kind of stuff. Yeah. And you can get that on both sides of this preference divide. You can get that experience. But where my preference is connected is in the way I bring that feeling about. I don't get that feeling of surprise when I'm working with the story.
Yeah. Thinking of just plot. Yeah.
Yeah. But I do get it when I think, holy crap, what did they just do? Right. I've got to stop that, right? In the role of this character. And do I have the tools and resources and skills that let me as the villain in that moment stop that? And I will use the system to determine if the villain can or cannot interfere.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so, we're all playing the game together. It's all just about the experience. So yes, I definitely think about this type of literature that I like, but I'm not trying to reproduce it. I don't want to think in terms of chapters. I don't want to bring about those sorts of things, but I will end sessions on cliffhangers.
Oh yeah.
Not for story purposes.
No.
But a little bit for genre fidelity.
Yes,
should be cliffhangers.
Yeah, exactly.
But more so that we have that sense of, play has stopped, and it helps us transition back to.
Yeah. No, I like that. What I like when we get to that point where I'm about the hint, I suppose, that I take that I've ended it at a good point is where I get a big sigh from all the players, like like they're just gasping for breath at that last, like I can't believe it, we got this far, or I can't believe that would like, what do you think that's, or like, oh, what's going to happen next? I have no idea. No one has any idea what's going to happen next. We'll have to see what next week brings, and we'll all come into it. Yeah. And then so it's not so much like you say, it's not so like the cliffhanger here is just so that we can propel it to the next. It's more I at a certain point I do want players to kind of wait with bated breath and what are we gonna get out of this, or what's gonna happen next, or it just seems like nothing is going right, and I like that that tension that players can experience. And so that's what I look for, is that moment where it's, so we'll call it there, and then we'll spend a good half hour just talking about what happened.
Talking about it. Yeah. Someone's staring at you like, don't you end it here. Don't you end it here.
I've seen a few players that are like, quick, do something before he ends it. We've got to get something. We've got to quickly open that door, get through it before you. So, but yeah, it's a lot of fun. I really like that idea of preparation for improvisation. And I'm trying to read more genre books that are in the same type of genre that we're playing in, with that idea of, hey, if I expose myself to more of this material, then I'll have that well that I can draw on if I need a character, and I need a character that's believable in the setting. And so I'm thinking of those characters that I've either seen portrayed, or if it's on film, or I've read about, if it's in a book. So I like that idea of that my preparation isn't so much just to create hard and fast things, but be able to improvise on the run,
Yeah.
but without falling into the quantum ogre type thing where,
Right. Because that's a story tool,
because
right?
that's a
Yeah.
story tool, and I'd rather, like you, I really like the idea, the spectrum that you've put, the storytelling experience. And I understand that it is a spectrum. You wouldn't necessarily, you'd probably have elements of both in both cases,
Yeah.
but I lean much more myself to have more of an experience. Like you said, it shouldn't be, oh no, the story is derailed because my guy met the bus, and he came out for the worse after meeting the bus. But that it wasn't this an amazing opportunity I had to play this 70-year-old, and it's just too bad that he was not quite quick enough to get out of the way of the bus. But that's just the way. It was still an experience that everyone can look back and say that was fantastic, and I loved it the way you played that character. And we're starting to get glimpses of that, where players are complimenting each other for playing in character,
Yeah.
and that's reinforcing more in character play. Like I think
Right.
it's great the way you're playing this, or I can't believe that you played it that way. I never would have pictured you being able to play that. Like a guy that's been a sober individual his whole life. Like I would be surprised if he ever touched a drop of alcohol. He played a pilot that was only a good pilot if he had been drinking, and he played that like it was incredible. I talked to him afterwards. He goes, "Yeah, I've never wanted to touch alcohol. It's just never been a thing for him. He just never at all. And in real life, he never would. But he said, but I had the greatest time playing that character in character, as one that, I'm only good behind the yoke of the plane if I've had a few
Right.
longish draws on my flask, right?
Right.
And it was just great. And everyone really focused on that. That I would say is not story. That is experience. And
Yeah.
I think that's great. So that's what I'm looking for. I'm still looking for more. And so I've been busy writing all my notes as you've been talking about what I can do to be more efficient with my prep time, because I know I'm going to need some, just so that I can sit down at the table and feel comfortable that, okay,
Well, that's the thing, right? Feeling comfortable.
I'm ready.
Right.
Yeah.
So
But not
what I
9 hours of
no.
detailed notes that
Yeah.
in more cases than not, they're not used anyway. And I end up filling binders full of these unused session plans that
Right.
I'm never going to use. I may as well go. I should actually, after this, I should probably go through those and recycle some of that stuff. It's
And
just not
recycle. Yeah.
working.
Find it. Be
Yeah.
inspired. What I
Yeah.
tend to do, I have a fairly long commute, but even before that, when I didn't, there are things that you think about. You have to think about your daily chores and whatnot. But when you're free to think about what you want, then I like to put myself in the shoes of characters that we've met and haven't met, and kind of what would they do if, right?
That's a good, yeah, that's a good
Same as what you
suggestion.
do with like this player you're describing with his alcoholic pilot.
Yeah.
I'm sure he was drawing on life experience of people around him that he knew had
Yeah.
various reliances on alcohol, or even just archetypal images or stereotypical images. But he had to
Yeah.
assemble this personality to
Hmm.
communicate this to the
Hmm.
group, and you're just doing that on a larger scale. What does the city? What is 1975 New York or 1931 Boston?
Hmm.
What is its feel? What is the zeitgeist, right? What's the feel,
Yeah.
the
What
tension,
is the
right?
feel? Hmm.
And is it the Son of Sam period where people are absolutely paranoid of their neighbors, and they're starting to watch their
Hmm.
kids for the first time in
Yeah.
history,
Yeah, exactly.
and
Yeah. Fear City, right? The brochure published by the NYPD and the FDNY, I think, that it was
yeah,
like, yeah, be afraid. Don't leave your hotel room after 6
It's 10
p.m.
o'clock. Do
That,
you know where your kids
yeah,
are? Yeah.
exactly. And how does that permeate the zeitgeist? To what is that going to, how is that going to change, and how will the players interact with that or attempt to? And it's all an exercise of pretend, and
Yeah.
can you pretend in this very specific setting with this specific guy, this, a driver for the Gambino family. Like, okay, so what do you, like, what is your goal, like, other than just live another day? One of the things that was interesting, and again, it comes back to your chestnut example, just little descriptions. Well, 1975 New York, there's no such thing as a non-smoking space.
Right.
So like players, like they describe going into a restaurant, most restaurants, they're going to be a
Clouds.
haze of blue
Yeah.
smoke just kind of rising up. Everyone's smoking on the bus, like this is not, this is before the age of, you can't have the secondhand smoke thing, right? So
Yeah.
it's just a little
Airlines.
detail that helps them imagine, yeah, it's kind of like New York now, but different. It's different. It's not the same. It's
So,
I
like one
like those
exercise
details.
we can do about preparation for improvisation. So, you've got a driver for the Gambino crime family.
Hmm.
Okay. So, that means a lot of sitting in a hot car and waiting, or sitting in a cold car and
Exactly.
waiting, listening to
Exactly.
the radio. So, what's on the
Yes.
radio?
What's on the radio? What's your
What's
favorite
on the radio?
song? Having that radio play in the background. I do that actually. In our group, I know some players find that too distracting, but we keep the volume down low. But I have that just streaming so that I can, and then I can change it. I've been experimenting a little bit with kind of theme music for a character. Like I think
Uh-huh.
that would be interesting to try to get, especially early on in the session, just to get them in that frame of mind. Yeah, this is me. This is my thing. So, but yeah, I think that's and so we do have a driver, right? We have a driver, we have the contact guy, kind of like the bird man from the John Wick movies, that kind of guy.
Right.
And so they're trying, those kind of details. But I really like your suggestion of spending my prep time thinking of those characters for which I'm responsible,
Yeah.
and what are they doing, and why, how would they react to what happened there, and when the Italian restaurant was bombed by the Sinaloa cartel. Okay, so what would they be doing? What is that?
Right.
What are the police up to? And who
Action,
is,
reaction,
yeah,
interaction. Yeah.
reaction, and how is this? And the players, when they did this and they had this altercation here and it was on public transit, well, what's the transit authority doing, and what's the mayor's response to this, and there's something else? And what about the neighbors? What about just the common people? What are they up to
Yeah.
now?
What do you hear at the
And
bus stop? What
yeah,
did the graffiti change? Are there posters up
exactly.
saying "What's being done"?
Yeah, we want action on this. They've gone too far, like that. So I think that more than just thinking of an interesting environment, I think that would help inform the environment. But what are the people reacting to? And then so I'm not thinking so much as to what's the size of the Italian restaurant, and do they have the red and white checkered tablecloths, or do they have the solid ones, or is it a pizza joint, and what do those look like in
Right.
1975? I'm not worried so much about that. I'm more worried about the people,
Relationships
the
and
relationships, the
interactions. Yeah.
motivations, and how those are evolving within the context of the game rules. Because I liked what you had said earlier, that you're going to use the system to help design the what the villains are up to and what they can be up to. And I think
Yeah.
those are good systems, depending on the game you're using, of course. But I like using those types of things going on. I've experimented with using some of Kevin Crawford's publications, because he does lean more into a sandbox style where you can have some different factions, and how what the faction play is going to look like. So I have experimented a little bit with that, but I'm still early going.
Right,
Um,
because it can expand, right? Once you play
yeah.
for long enough, and you've got this huge cast of characters and these different
Hmm.
factions and all these things going on, and you simply don't have enough time to think about it. But
No.
you certainly don't have enough time to go follow through with the system aspects, the
Hmm.
mechanisms of play for
Hmm.
all of it. So finding a shorthand that you can trust,
Yes.
I find very helpful, because I want to use the dice to determine if they're successful or not
Yes.
successful
Me
in
too.
their aims.
Yeah.
Because for me, it's not about the story. Otherwise, I would just decide. I would use my
Yes,
GM
exactly.
fiat.
Yes,
Yes.
exactly. We would just be capricious because you and I probably are capricious. But I do think it's important to have the dice decide at the end of the day, and not just be, well, for the interests of the story, this has to happen. I'm like, no,
Right. It's time for a setback.
yeah,
I think
that's
that's
yeah.
really satisfying from an artistic, to satisfy an artistic preference, right? And
Mhm.
the players all get sucked in. It's like, yeah, this is awesome, right? How am I going to get out
Mhm.
of this cool situation? Because sometimes the
Mhm.
dice just deliver success after success after success after
Sometimes they
success.
do. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Sometimes they do. That's true. That is
So
true. Well, you've given me a lot to think about, Anthony. That's great. I've
cool.
definitely am leaning more, like my prep has changed considerably from what it was previous.
Sure.
And I do think that it's a more efficient use of time on the morning commute to think, well, instead of thinking, okay, so what's the encounter balance metrics for this next thing, and how many encounters do I need, and what is what is the map going to look like, and what is the treasure in this room, and rather than think so much about that, just thinking more about the motivation of the opponents, and not just the opponents, but the other characters of
In
interest.
the
The
world.
ladies in the red
Yeah.
dress, what's the motivation? What is she after?
Yeah.
And
For your
and
intention.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Because
And how has
some
that
other
changed?
intention.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. So I'll give
Yeah.
you
So
one
I
more little thing that I
sure.
think that your talent for preparation might you might enjoy, and it
Mhm.
doesn't take very long. So you like using background music, so real background music that the characters are
Yeah.
really hearing. So you can
Yes.
also
Yeah.
do news bulletins and
Oh, that's a good
advertisements.
idea. Oh, news and
You can
ads.
just use a little voice changer, and have something playing in the background.
Love it.
And some of the characters aren't even going to know. Some of the players aren't even going to notice
Mhm.
when it comes on, but some of them will.
Yes, they
And
will.
it's like, wait a minute, and
Yeah.
they'll hear about a serial killer, or they'll hear about a restaurant explosion, or whatever,
Yes.
and they'll wonder if they should care about it.
Yeah.
And it it just dials up the notch. It's like
That's great.
handing someone a will and testament in Call of Cthulhu, saying, "You've just inherited this strange house in Maine."
Oh yeah. Well, wait, quick, catch the next train to Maine. Like we're going.
Yeah.
I really
Um,
like that idea of the news and ads, and what I like about that so much is that immediately my mind goes to, this is a way um, to provide that detail again, that
without talking.
authentic
Yeah.
detail, but also an invitation to them, for them to decide whether they're acting on their own, um, or they're going to interact with that detail. So do I interact with that? Well, that's interesting. Well, there's now talk about whether or not the feds are going to bail out New York City. New York City's going bankrupt. What does that mean for so that's a real story. And whether it's real or not, I could make up fictional ones, of course. But
Right.
but then the players, they can then interact with that. Well, this is maybe a time where bribes to the NYPD the police might be a little more amenable to taking a little bit of money, because there's some question as to whether or not they're going to have a pension. There's some question of whether
Right.
the city is going to make payroll. So for players that are listening, and I want to reward players that are listening for those kind of details, like
Yeah.
the wealthy uncle, recluse, eccentric uncle that had left his strange leather bound books to someone all of a sudden. Like what
Right.
is that all about? That's a interesting detail. You can interact with that. You can choose to just continue acting as you're going through, as your player, with your own motivations, but just like the street urchin you mentioned with the but I'm still thinking about the street urchin. Where's his next meal going to come from? Like
Right.
you're playing on like if I'm playing an empathetic character, not some greedy so and so like myself in real life, but just an empathetic person who would be like, well, I'm still bothers me that little kid looks so hungry, and where is he now, and it's snowing outside. And so there's a I really like the news and ads because it's a way to provide a little bit of exposition without it being an info dump. Like I
I'm not.
don't
Yeah.
like the because I worry that players start to disengage. Like, okay, just tell me the salient points. Like, give me the Cliff Notes version.
Right.
I don't want to read, volume copious amounts of block text for them
Yeah.
to
Just make a
parse
little
through.
15-second
Just like
recording and
that's why
slip it
I
into
think the
the.
headline's a great idea. Like there's someone hawking newspapers on the side of the road, and what's the headline? What is the big news thing? Or like you said, there so and so's waiting to catch the bus, and what are they talking
What are
about at the
people
bus
talking about?
station, about the bus
Yeah.
stop? You know, that's great. I'm going to add that for sure. That's a great idea, and I haven't done much of that. I'm going to do more of that.
So that's how I make myself comfortable that I can present that full world.
Mm-hmm.
Not not so full there's no room for the PCs, but that it's easy for the players to imagine there's other people around their characters, and
Yes.
that everybody has some kind of agenda in their life, and that
Mm-hmm.
they can feel comfortable if they want to talk to the guy hawking the newspapers, that
Yes.
he'll have something to say because I'm
He'll have something to
aware
say.
of what the
Yeah.
news items are and that kind
Yeah.
of stuff. So
And if I've done that preparation for improvisation, then when they do decide to interact, then I've already kind of thought it through enough that I can have that be a short but meaningful interaction. So it's not just it's punchy, it's short, it's not some boring, okay, every time you go in to buy your coffee in the morning, we have to go through a half an hour of role play that's tedious. No, it doesn't have to be that way. It's just, hey, have you heard the news? It's a shame what was going on there. I just can't believe that. My cousin just got laid off, whatever. There's something there that's punchy enough without being tedious for everyone else.
yeah, to reinforce the
Yeah,
environment you're going for.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Cool.
Well,
All
this
right.
has been really valuable for me, Anthony. I appreciate you
I've enjoyed it myself.
having this conversation with me. I feel like I've gotten more out of it, but I do appreciate your time. That's great. So
I really enjoy talking with people who are investigating their play. It doesn't matter if they're trying something new, if they're going back to something old, but that they're thinking about it with intention and wanting to make some changes, and I find that process really exciting. So
yeah,
thanks for coming on.
yeah, me too. Appreciate it. Thanks for the time.
All right, my pleasure. Take care.
Yeah, you too. Thanks, Anthony.
This episode was recorded on December 28th, 2023, and is appearing now in the new year. I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly did, and I look forward to more conversations with Crispy and with others. But this episode has gone on long enough. If you'd like to comment or contact me about information in this episode or others, please consider using SpeakPipe. You can find me at SpeakPipe at Casting Shadows Podcast to send a voice message. You can email me at runescastshadows, that's all one word, at gmail.com. And on social media, like Facebook or X or Blue Sky or YouTube, etc., you can find me at Runeslinger. Anyway, if you're particularly brave, you could try sending a voice message through Spotify for podcasters. Until the next time, take care.